Appreciate all of you coming out on a dark, rainy day, and we understand it's sleeting in part of the state, so we've had a substitution on our panel, but it's a real plus, I think you'll find. I want to first say that we wouldn't be here today without the help and support of Dean Skip Rutherford and Nikolai DePippa, the develop and operate this speakers program. It's also supported by many volunteers, such as Bob G. I saw Bob here earlier. He also works with us. The archives of the Clinton School website of past speakers and programs is a global treasure of great ideas and thinking about problem-solving solutions. If you ever get depressed about current events and want to be inspired, take a look at the recordings of past programs at clintonschoolspeakers.com. These days, this program and others are also live streamed globally, and I know many from all over the world are already logged in with us here today, and we welcome you to this proceedings. Our panel is delighted to be here with you today to help initiate the 2018 Global Leaders Summit and Technology Expo convened right across the street by our partners, Heifer International, and its outstanding team led by CEO Pierre Ferrari and CFO Bob Bloom. Heifer International operates in countries all over the world in its mission to help end hunger and poverty and care for the earth. All of Heifer's country managers from several continents are here in Little Rock this week, and I hope you will meet them after this program and throughout the week. We're all going over there to see the expo after this concludes. I hope you can join us. For those of you who may not know it, Heifer organizes farmers of many types, such as dairy, coffee, cocoa, chicken, into large-scale co-ops, which can serve 100,000 families or more in different countries around the world. These co-ops are properly managed business units, which can boost the income level of farmers so they can pay for better technology, water, power, cold storage, etc., which can lead to further increases in income. For example, a cow that is properly watered with a water system can produce 10 times more milk than one that is not. As we will hear from the panel, they'll take their seats in a moment, this increased income and access to technology can lead to much better lives for the co-op families and communities. The Global Solutions Institute project has a broad spectrum of global partnership, including the University of Arkansas Clinton School, which helped bring GSI to life with the inaugural program back in 2012. The key mission of GSI is to identify proven, commercialized technologies and other solutions, and then help match the solutions with global problems and help them accelerate deployment of the solutions domestically and globally. We'll hear some examples today. While many technology parks and other organizations help develop and commercialize new technologies, we believe that the GSI GTED2 project is the only organization of its type focused exclusively on deployment into the global marketplace. A major part of the Club de Madrid P80 Little Rock Accord, which was signed here in Little Rock in 2012, was to develop the Club Madrid happens to be an organization of 115 former presidents and prime ministers from 80 countries who came here to Little Rock, met with another group that Dr. Eugene Yun helped organize with Prince Charles called the P80. The P stands for pension, which is now pension and sovereign wealth funds, try to mobilize capital to solve global problems. In November of last year in Washington, D.C., GSI launched its Fulbright initiative to identify and mobilize for the first time several of the more than 200,000 Fulbright Scholar alumni from 160 countries around the world into GSI Fulbright committees, which can be tied together with social media systems, which we'll hear a little bit about later. These committees can then be exposed to new problem-solving technologies and determine if they make sense for their countries, and if so, they can help identify local partners for deploying the technologies in their respective countries. This initiative was inspired by the former Vietnamese ambassador who spoke here, and he noted that 60% of the ministers in Vietnam, government ministers in Vietnam, are Fulbright alumni, including the Deputy Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, and the Science and Technology Advisor. To bring everyone up to date on what we've been doing at GSI since the signing of the Little Rock Accord, on June 4th of this year, the United Nations invited the presentation of a Global Solutions Summit, which was organized by Dr. Al Watkins, who, along with Eugene Yun, has been a major part of this effort, starting with the signing of the Club Madrid P80 Little Rock Accord in 2012. On June the 4th, some 500 delegates from around the world gathered at the headquarters of the United Nations in New York to discuss how to more efficiently deploy problem-solving solutions globally. The Heifer co-op model was discussed at great extent, as was the GSI Fulbright initiative, and were very well received. One discussion of a specific problem-solving technology attracted a lot of interest, and this solution was developed by the UK, United Kingdom-based Perpetual Global, of which their head of business operations is here today with us and one of our panelists, which converts plastic bottles into new ester, which makes garments, which can make these high-quality garments at a lower cost than conventional means by petroleum companies using 75% less power and 85% less water. And see, Rush Deacon, the CEO of Arkansas Capital, is here, and he actually visited the plant in India that's doing 2.5 million bottles a day, and it is much in demand. I believe they have orders for some 8,000 tons, and they have an expressed desire for 800,000 tons of product, and they're actually looking to put a facility here. And so Mark Lepresto is here. Well, you'll hear more from him on the panel. Well, forgive me for taking time from our program for conveying this background information to you, but we felt the information the panel will be discussing will be much more meaningful for you if taken in the context of the overall Global Solutions Institute mission. So we're focused on we're here today, we're focused on a new GSI financial engineering program for technology deployment, which we believe can revolutionize financing for technology deployment in less developed countries. The idea was developed in conjunction with the June 4th meeting at the United Nations headquarters. It involves a new nonprofit global leasing company to purchase and deploy technology solutions like water technologies, microelectric grids, telemedicine, and more, to large-scale Heifer International and other farmer co-ops. And the magic sauce is the leases can be guaranteed by major corporations as well as some foundations that see it in their interest that these farmers be successful, because ultimately they supply these large corporates. Due to the success of the Heifer co-op model, no significant losses are anticipated, and the guarantees should not really be material to the larger corporates, because the lease payments can be structured with low initial payments as the technology improves the output of the farmers. And as the leased income develops technology develops more income, the lease payments can rise, and then eventually the farmers will own the technology. So with that, I'll ask our panelists to take a seat up here on the panel, all four of them, and I'll introduce them. Matter of fact, I'll go ahead and start introducing them. So James Schwinn, who is approaching the stage now, is a recognized financial engineering expert with over 25 years of experience with international financial institutions, including ING Barings and Citibank in multiple countries around the world. At Barings, he led an international structured finance business that funded over $9 billion of transactions over a wide range of asset classes. Over his career, James has lived and worked in New York, Amsterdam, Sydney, Calgary, Houston, and soon Washington, D.C. However, he's a closet Arkansas Razorback and ultimately plans to return to Arkansas as his last stop. Mr. Lars Willi, who's to my immediate right, is CEO of WeConnex AG of St. Gallen, Switzerland. Mr. Willi's been to Little Rock 4 times, but he's an expert in technology deployer with many years of experience in countries throughout the world. His Nexus projects focus on working directly with partners like Heifer International to empower small stakeholder farmers and fishing communities by sourcing and deploying interesting technologies into a system for renewable energy generation, drinking water, sanitation solutions, waste management, waste to energy, mobile communications, internet access, and more. Done amazing work in countries all over the world, and we're honored to have him here today with us. Dr. Eugene Yun, who I mentioned earlier on the far side of the table, is founder and strategist of Simverse, a blockchain project with a new platform for decentralized peer-to-peer networking. He's also CEO and managing partner of EOS Investment Partners based in Seoul, Korea, and is a co-founder and managing director of the P80 Group Foundation. As mentioned earlier, the P80 Group was established with Charles, the Prince of Wales, to encourage the 80 largest pension and sovereign wealth funds from around the world to mobilize large-scale capital to solve global problems. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Minnesota and earned his undergraduate degree in economics at Yosin University in Korea. I think he gets the award for coming here the farthest. Lars is a close second. Mark Lepresto, I mentioned earlier. Mark Lepresto is Director of Business Development for Perpetual Global Technologies. This is the technology I mentioned that has breakthrough to convert and is converting 2.5 million plastic bottles a day into ester, which can be used for making garments, but also many other things like medical supplies, uniforms, wrap for food, and so forth. He has spent 16 years with Bankers Trust, ending up as managing director responsible for the London-based Client Risk Advisory Group. He was top ranked globally for 3 consecutive years by Euromoney. Mark has a BA honors from the University of California, Berkeley, and an MBA from Wharton's, specializing in finance and strategy. So we're delighted to have the panelists here today with us. I'm going to start with our architect of this new financial engineering program, James Schwinn. James, could you kind of give some background about this GSI Global Leasing Company Finance Initiative and how it can be constructed?
Sure, absolutely. Do I need the please? Okay. Is that okay? Great. Thanks. Okay. Well, the basic idea behind the leasing company is to form a nonprofit entity to purchase and lease proven problem-solving technology solutions. As Mark indicated, like water, microgrid power systems, other infrastructure, and productivity-enhancing technologies. To do this to Heifer International and other farmer co-ops in developing countries. The strength of the program comes from an assurance of payments under the leases, from guarantees from multinational corporations, some foundations, and where appropriate, we would be looking to enhance those assurances with Exim Bank, USAID, and OPIC protection mechanisms of various types. Under this model, leases would start with low initial payments. They would increase as the leased assets help co-ops generate more income. And over time, those payments could also include a reserve that would enable the co-op at the end of the lease to purchase the asset on its own. Interestingly, in cases where newer or more productive replacement technologies are demanded because of the commercial success of the co-op, the leasing company can identify the best placement for the older but still productive technology assets that are coming off lease, and make those available on attractive purchase or lease terms. So in this way, the leasing company is actually looking to assure the most productive utilization of all technology assets that cross its balance sheet over their useful lives. In cases where technology assets satisfy the needs of a co-op, but substantial commercial growth isn't anticipated or desired, the co-op can purchase the assets at the term of the lease with the reserve or with philanthropic capital. In cases where platform scaling was attempted but did not achieve commercial success, the surplus technology assets would be redeployed to other co-ops. The financing mechanism provides a framework in which co-ops can test their aspirations and their capabilities to scale themselves into larger commercial platforms while continuing to improve the sustainability and the quality of life of their communities. It's important to emphasize, however, that this type of financing mechanism applies strictly to CapEx investments. It doesn't apply to the other working capital requirements of growing enterprises. The financing mechanism that we propose would provide co-ops in developing countries with a scalable and a replicable tool for acquiring problem-solving technology assets faster and more efficiently than traditional alternatives, and encourage more inclusive ownership of commercial assets farther up the value chain, which in turn would contribute more meaningfully to long-term economic durability and resiliency. The ecosystem of the proposed GSI Global Leasing Company Finance Initiative comprises the following: a multi-company lease financing platform, project flow regulators like Heifer to assure that the right projects enter the financing program, a scaling partner like Weconix to assure that co-ops scale efficiently and to a high quality standard, technology flow regulators like the University of Arkansas to vet technology solutions and assure that the right solutions are mapped into the right projects, guarantors to assure timely payments under the lease contracts, and debt and equity investors, including, among others, foundation endowments, socially responsible investment funds, including pension funds, and sovereign wealth funds to supply the investment capital required by the lease financing platform to purchase and lease technology assets. So, why would a major multinational corporation guarantee lease payments under a program like this in developing countries? When you think about it, it's really quite simple. It's actually a low-cost way for a corporation to explore, develop, and expand supply chain relationships on the buy side of the market, and it's a low-cost way to build brand and reputation on the sell side of the market. Lease guarantees can act as precursors to direct capital investment that can work to identify and build relationships with the best local supply and distribution partners, and they can enable a corporation to gain deeper insights into local market dynamics, transactional protocols, and on-the-ground risks. They can provide a powerful and a strategic tool for acquiring timely and relevant market intelligence, and they can mitigate financial risks associated with direct capital investment. In addition, the integration of an enterprise scaling partner into the development process helps a co-op to not only grow its capacity, but also to understand and meet domestic and international trading partner expectations that relate to supply chain reliability, logistics, resource planning, sustainability, and data collection and reporting. As a result, the co-op can proactively work to mitigate transactional and operational risks and to reduce the number of out-of-pocket development costs that otherwise would have been for the account of the corporation seeking market entry, market expansion, and/or a trading or JV partnership. You may have noticed that none of the reasons that I've cited so far for guaranteeing lease payments is entirely philanthropic. And that's not to diminish in any way the importance of humanitarian action or social responsibility as motivators. In fact, under the program, both will be advocated quite strongly to generate support. But what will give this initiative its scalability and its replicability, and in many respects, its sustainability, will be the manufacture of economic and risk mitigating benefits for itself and for market trading partners. What might this initiative mean for philanthropic capital, as well as for foundation endowments, socially responsible investment funds, and sovereign wealth funds? The proposed GSI Global Leasing Company Finance Initiative is designed to expand the reach of every dollar of philanthropic and social impact capital invested in the leasing platform activity, and importantly, to open a door to foundation and fund investment by using corporate guarantees and other loss mitigation mechanisms to dramatically shift the risk and return equation of every dollar invested. In other words, under this program, the parties who benefit from market development carry the risk of market development. Under the envisaged lease financing structures then, philanthropic capital, foundation endowments, socially responsible investment funds, and sovereign wealth funds should not only expect to achieve philanthropic aims, they also should expect to receive back their invested capital along with an appropriate risk-adjusted return, and importantly, have the opportunity to reinvest that capital and return back into the program to generate further philanthropic impact and market returns on a continuing basis. At the project level, what the proposed initiative offers that is distinctly and powerfully additive to philanthropic initiatives in this area is a scalable CapEx funding bridge to the next stage of economic development. So, in closing the summary of the initiative, what I would like you to do is think about it as a recirculation system, one that aggregates, allocates, grows, and recycles CapEx investment to catalyze more productive social and economic outcomes, one that deploys and redeploys technology assets to assure more productive utilization of those assets over their useful lives, and one that expands the reach of every dollar of philanthropic and social impact capital that crosses this balance sheet.
Thanks, James, and we'll ask questions after the other panelists make their remarks, but that's the 30,000-foot view of what we're doing. Lars is at the 0-foot altitude of what we're doing. He's the guy that is the boots on the ground in difficult markets, working with folks in those markets to deploy technologies, and he's put together systems that are solve many problems all at the same time. The magic thing that has been missing is finance. How do these communities finance the deployment of these systems that he has organized? And so we want to hear from him as to kind of what it is he's doing and how what he's doing could be a target for lease company support, which would mean if it's successful, we really change the world deploying things that Lars's company works on.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here. It's the fourth time already. I was here the first time, I think 2013. At that time, pitching a technology, a water purification system, which is powered by solar. The second time, I think, was more already a little bit going into a direction where we are, and now we do something totally different. Not totally, but quite different. And the question is why? In 4 years, why have we changed so much? Right? I started my own company in 2015 with the goal that we just saw in the field, in the economy, a need for new business models. So we started off creating business models for deploying technologies into countries where they're mostly needed. And that's what we're doing, and therefore we are by definition already a learning organization, and we learn a lot on an everyday basis. What we are currently doing, we are setting up so-called nexus centers in developing countries. So we go into a village, we provide basic infrastructure, which could be water, power, communication, a building, sanitation, and so on. And then we have a combination of a B2C business, which means that we sell, for example, water to the local community on a very low pricing, and we combine it with the B2B business so that we try to help use the facilities, the technologies for commercial purpose. So I can give you an example. In Madagascar, for example, we have water and power. The combination of it allows us to generate ice. With the ice, we can help the local fishermen to develop a cold chain. We are in the background organizing the cold chain. We're collecting the fish on various of these nexus centers in various villages, transport it to our customers, and then we have a better position to negotiate deals, prices, because we have more quantity and a better quality of fish. These additional margins we use to cross-subsidize the investments on the infrastructure. So like this, we have an integrated system. The concept that we developed is about technology deployment, but it is also about know-how transfer and about access to markets, because that's also missing for especially the local fishermen and also the local farmers. So we try to help there. How are we doing it? We said it is time for thinking outside of the silos. We have tried that. We have tried to do power, food, water, connectivity and so on in separate fields. That hasn't been working. And the situation for these local groups, for these local smallholders, sometimes is also not in silos. It is a complex world. They have, in one day, they have a problem with food and power and water and so on, and all interconnected. So we need to target our solutions according to their living situations. We have taken one step further in our structure compared to many others. So we're taking risks. What does that mean? We are investing in a local company, but we only own half of the shares, whereas the other half of the shares belongs to the farmers and the fishermen. Why that? The reason is simple. We want to collaborate with them. We don't want to collaborate on their shoulders and make our business on their shoulders. So when they are successful, we are successful, but only when they are successful, we are successful. So we believe that this is truly sustainable and goes one step further. It makes the whole structure as well more efficient. And we didn't invent this, we just copied and adapted it from existing models which were quite successful in Europe, for example, when 100 years ago the farmers started to organize themselves in co-ops. We do it maybe on a more market basis. So we have a very strong long-term focus, and we are actively searching for partners, NGOs, universities, technology partners, and investors. Why? Why such a complicated model? So we think it is time to think entrepreneurial again. Now that might sound strange, but if you look back, the big entrepreneurs that you had in the US, that we had in Europe, what did they do? They were thinking long-term. When you think long-term, you need to play with the resources you have responsibly. And resources are natural, they're social, and they're capital as well. In the past years, it seems a little bit that we were kind of figuring out that the social and ecological capital is anyway endless, so we focused on the money only. And I think that has to change. So we need to become more entrepreneurial again and think as well holistic in what we're doing. So we need new approaches which are fair for all sides. And that includes the locals, especially the locals in these developing countries where we now focus on. I think there is more when we talk about sustainability than investing in Tesla, in solar power plants, or in a microcredit organization. We need to take risks again. There's no time for colonialism anymore. Now the challenge, what is the challenge? The challenge is that the time is ticking. We have the Sustainable Development Goals which were set until 2030. So people are growing, the number of people is growing, we eat more food, we want to have better food, and we only have one planet to feed us all. So we need to have solutions, and we need to have them until in 2 years, because we need to have 10 years to implement them, and then already 2030 is there. So we don't have time to waste anymore. Another challenge is that the financial sector is not ready for this kind of market. The financial sector is still focusing on the Teslas and the microcredits and all the other sustainable projects which are in our world bringing returns which are on market rates. In these areas, to really talk with the locals and collaborate with locals, this type of structures with funds and so on might not work. So maybe there we have to be innovative and talk about solutions as James just has presented. Another thing which is a challenge but might be helpful is the reputational risks of the off-takers. Think about Walmart, think about Danone. The customers, you and I, we are asking more and more about a certain proof where our products are coming from. So they cannot allow anymore that there is some black sheep in their supply chain. So there we need to check as well, which is maybe a chance to really start working on the ground. So I think there is many good projects, many of those developed, for example, by organizations like Heifer and Windrock and so on. But we need to leverage them. We need to take them to the next level so that the NGOs have the capital free again to scale again on their own. Whereas the co-ops, the good projects continue with a sustainable future. And there we need to help. There we need to collaborate with the off-takers, with the financial sector, and have an integrated system. And then I think we have a chance to tackle the problems that we all face. Thank you.
Thanks, Lars. And I tell you what he's doing, he's building the things that a leasing company could credibly provide funding to. And you can see his enthusiasm, and has had a lot of success too. He's also got a Fulbright scholar in Madagascar working for his company. He's helping us set up a committee there in Madagascar. So Mark Lepesto is here, as I mentioned, from London via Seattle, but we're delighted to have you here. Everybody says, well, you keep talking about solving problems but technologies. I mean, give me an example of what you're talking about. Well, on the cover of National Geographic a couple of months ago was a big ocean full of plastic, and you keep seeing articles about plastic, and what are we going to do about plastic and so forth. Well, they've spent a lot of money and a lot of time to develop a technology that is able to take plastic bottles at scale, produce this ester, which I'll tell you about, but do it less expensively, as I mentioned before, than the conventional oil and gas companies can. So Mark, if you'd tell us an amazing story about Perpetual, and as I mentioned earlier, they're looking to put a facility, major facility here that will be a base for global expansion, but also it's a tie to the Heifer co-ops, because one of the things these co-op people can do is start bottle collection business, plastic bottle collection businesses in their countries to be able to find an additional income. And if you all remember, not that long ago, you would see aluminum cans all over the roads and waterways. You don't see that anymore because the price of aluminum cans, because of a successful recycling technology, is so high that people collect the cans. And that's what they're doing with plastic bottles. Mark?
Thanks, Mark. I guess I'd like to structure my, my comments extemporaneously into just some key punch points. First of all, a little bit more elaboration on what we do, and then why we're doing it and why we've spent a number of years and a good amount of money and a lot of sweat and toil to get where we are, and then how we're doing it. A little bit on the technology, but not too much, not too deep, but also talking about some key components, what Mark alluded to, the feedstock aspect of it, where we're getting the key ingredient for our process, and also players and I think processes that have been involved that have been very helpful in us making our progress. And that includes global brands, including Walmart, including some of the biggest apparel brands that do have some vision and a good amount of environmental and social responsibility that they've come to, partly because a lot of them are outdoor companies and their customer base say you really have to do something about the environment. Part of it's because there's some rather aggressive NGOs over the years that have sort of gotten out of stick and beaten them into it and raised their awareness, but they've played a vital part because they're our demand, ultimately. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about the opportunity in terms of, you know, what that means in terms of our existing feedstock and how that plays back into Heifer, what they do in the co-ops. So first of all, really simply, we have a factory in India, and as Mark alluded to, we recycle roughly 2.5 million of these bottles. This is a very nice, clean example of this bottle. As you can imagine, in India, we never get bottles like this. It's just inherently in the process, you know, a good amount of the bottles come, actually they're picked out of dump sites, landfill, and recovered, because this is a very expensive petrochemical. In one sense, I've always found it ironic in the US that everybody complains about gasoline prices, and then a lot of people will take these bottles and throw them away and not give it a second thought. But this is, you're throwing away gasoline effectively when you're throwing away this, or, you know, so that's something to think about. And particularly if I can point a finger at ourselves for the United States, because the United States has one of the lowest recycling rates and recovery rates in the world. You'll find in Asia, where there's a lot less infrastructure and resources, the recovery rate for bottles is, you know, 80, 85%, 90%. Countries that have been dedicated and committed to it, like Switzerland, extremely high, and very community-based. You know, they realize it's important to have a circular economy and to really use resources as efficiently as possible. So we take these bottles. We actually get them in flake form delivered by our partners, our supply chain partners in India, and we then turn it into this, which is a fine filament yarn. And we'll talk a little bit about the process, but basically this yarn is used in, let's say, a set of 100 bobbins to weave into a fabric, and then that fabric is turned into outdoor wear jackets, running jerseys for jogging, et cetera, all sorts of sports and apparel. To get from quite dirty bottles to a very clean yarn is quite magical, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The reason that why we do this is because, of course, it's plastic. It's a valuable petrochemical, so you might as well figure out something to do with it. But also because this doesn't biodegrade. It takes 200 years to break down, and then it's, you know, still not worth a lot. So you're much better off just grabbing it at the outset and doing something with it. And the why is also because there's a heck of a lot of this. They talk about 600 billion bottles a year that are, you know, basically made and consumed, and a lot of it gets thrown away. In the textile apparel industry, you have two primary products. One is a filament yarn that's then knitted or woven into fabric, and then you have staple fibers, similar to staple cotton, but made out of synthetic filaments. And between those two, it's roughly 40 million tons a year. The CO2 that's emitted by the textile industry is much greater than if you took all the freight emitted CO2 from trucks, from shipping freight, from air cargo and everything. You added all that up, textile's bigger than that. And to compound it, of course, textile also has the chemicals and other aspects to deal with. So lots of plastic, you need to figure out something to do with it. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is that these bottles are made out of polyester. And polyester is a rather paradoxical material, because polyester, on the one hand, yes, it takes 200 years to biodegrade. But if you have a good process, there's a very known chemistry where you can take a polyester molecule, which is roughly 100 ester small molecules all zipped together, and unzip them. And when you break them apart, you end up with a liquid solution that's roughly the consistency of vegetable oil. And the food industry is known for many years that you can actually purify food oil down to a very fine purity of like 5 microns with well-known, well-established vertical leaf filter technology. And that's exactly what we do. And once you have that very clean ester, which can be used for medical instrument packaging, it can be used for drinks approved by the FDA, you actually have a building block that's very magical and wonderful, because you can basically zip those esters back together and make a product again. So although polyester is very bad in that it's 200 years of time required for biodegrading, it's actually an extraordinarily magical material that can be used, reused, and reused, and reused again. And so from that standpoint, from a circular economy standpoint, this is one of the best packaging and one of the best materials that people have invented. So the question is, well, how do you actually do that? Well, we're rather unique, or Perpetual's rather unique, in that we developed a patented, or rather a very brilliant inventor out of Australia, invented a chemical recycling process where through a particularly and proprietary process, you break this and depolymerize these bottles down, and we do it roughly 25 tons a day, and you go through that process, which means that when you polymerize it back again, you're making polyester, and then you're spinning that into a yarn like this. And if you take 20 miles of this, you'll make one jersey. And that's only good for Adidas and Nike and everybody else if the first yard and the first 100 yards and the first 1,000 yards is as good as the last yard, because all of it has to be dyed consistently. And if it's not, then you'll get stripes and you'll never get a product in the store. And that is quite a demanding requirement, and that's what our process does. And it's our plant in India is the only plant in the world, but it's one that's scalable, which means like all petrochemical plants, where they get the real big efficiency is when you go and you build your first plant. Maybe when they build the first polyester plants, the key operating the key reactor vessel was maybe 10 tons, at the most that could be processed in a day. And now those reactor vessels are at 1,000 tons. But the required energy and electricity and so on doesn't go up linear. It's a fraction of that, which means your energy costs, your environmental impact goes down. This process is scalable. Almost everybody else in the world that recycles bottles does it with a mechanical process that is not scalable. And so what we want to do, including our showpiece plant here, is to demonstrate to the world that not only is this a great process that uses 75% less energy, 85% less water, but it's also a scalable one where we can make a product that's just as good as something out of virgin petrochemicals for Adidas, for Nike, for the North Face, etc., and we can do it cheaper. So lower environmental impact, lower water, and cheaper, and no compromise in quality, and that's what we're about. Now, The way we've gotten here is through a lot of patient investors who have, because any technology innovation and something like this takes a lot of time, and you think you're going to be able to do it in X, and it ends up being 3X and 4X. But they are committed to it, and they're basically, they want a profit, but they're also socially responsible, and they know things take time. We also have visionary customers. So the customers I've mentioned all have committed over in time to increasing their demand. Adidas has said by 2025, all of their polyester is going to be from recycled polyester, which is a huge commitment for them, because I'll tell you, they've made tremendous strides, but they have a long way to go, and the supply is not ready at hand. The capacity is not there. But the other side to this is that, of course, we have the feedstock side. And where do we get the feedstock? In India, it's a relatively what they call a disorganized sector. And you start off with people picking up bottles, on a very, very, very small scale. Some collection, at buildings, et cetera, but otherwise very, small scale. And then it's aggregated up. And that is how it's done. And so without that feedstock, we wouldn't be where we are. So the opportunity is one where the feedstock at the very first stage is basically going through simple mechanical processes where you have simple washing, you have a device that scrapes off the label, you have devices that separate this cap, which is not PET, from the rest of the plastic bottle. You shoot the plastic bottles through a device that basically has claws that cut it down into flakes. You then send it through baths that have separation, so non-plastic or different plastics of different weights get separated. All of that is very simple technology. It's pumps, it's motors, it's some water. It's not really sophisticated petrochemical engineering that we do. And that is something that can be scaled down and can be localized. And that is something that, because in India, plastic bottles are pervasive, and in Asia they're pervasive. They're all over, and they're growing at 15 or 20% per annum. And so they have to be recycled, and you want them to be recycled as efficiently as possible. And it's a lot better to break these down into flake on a localized basis and then centralize the shipment to a plant rather than having these in very bulky bottle forms. And that's something I think that's really interesting to explore with Heifer and the co-ops, is something to expand beyond their primary agricultural-based, perhaps, business to something that's really achievable with the proper training and support, and with the proper financial support in terms of a leasing structure or something like that. The equipment can be bought in India, it can be bought in Thailand, China, the United States, et cetera. Sourcing the equipment's not difficult, it's not proprietary. And that's the way that we see how we can, sort of help at a more of a, if you will, a decentralized and a lower tech basis to complement what we're doing, which, our plants cost 30 to 40 million, and obviously you need very skilled engineers, and they're petrochemical plants, but they're environmentally friendly petrochemical plants.
Thanks,
So,
Mark. And I will say this, a lot of you don't know this, but in addition to what we're doing with Heifer on the co-op collection effort, Adidas actually has a plant here in Little Rock at the port making garments, employing 500 people, or scaling up to employ 500 people. Well, now I want to introduce you again to I call him my brother. I've got two blood brothers, and Lee Eugene's my third brother since about 2010. But Eugene, I introduced you earlier, but your work with all over the world with the Asian Development Bank and P80 Group and what you're doing today, you've listened to this. It's kind of part of our dream that we had with the Club Madrid P80 to work on innovative financial plumbing systems to move money. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here again. Seems like only yesterday I was here, but Mark tells me it was 2012. So that was a great meeting we had, and we tried to bring some of the world statesmen belonging to Club de Madrid together with some of the big capital in the world, so the pension funds and the sovereign wealth funds. And I think we all had a good time. I'm not sure that we're getting the results that we were looking forward to. And let me expand on that idea a little bit. Today, we heard some really inspirational stories about helping and making a big impact in important areas of plastic recycling, or helping people in Madagascar or other countries, small fishermen, and so forth. And we have been involved in trying to affect, in a positive way, climate change for quite some time now, thanks to a great leader in thought and leader in kind, I think, Prince Charles of Wales. In 2007, he said, is there a way to mobilize more money into the climate finance space? And someone said, oh, pension funds have a lot of money. And he said, okay, I'll invite some of the biggest ones to my home. And so he asked at that time 8 of the largest pension funds from around the world, gave them dinner, and said, what are you going to do about climate change? And they talked a good story, and that's how the P8 movement started. Mark and I came along, and one day Prince Charles said, can we grow the size? 8 is too small. I'm a prince, you know. And he said, can't we have 800? So we said, calm down, we'll try to make it 80. And so it went from P8 to P80. Despite the numbers, I think there was a lot of good feeling that we were going to affect the climate change actions in a positive way. And indeed, I think the Paris Accord, which took place soon afterwards, was a good turning point for people's awareness of what we should do. Unfortunately, I think America now is leading the way out the door as far as the Paris Accord is concerned. So that's a little bit disconcerting to see from my point of view. Now, the way things work in the normal finance, conventional finance, is that there are inspirational stories like the ones we heard today, and we try to put them in front of the large fund managers, who then put that story in front of the larger fund managers, who then put that story in front of larger money managers, and along the way, the story gets a little bit distorted or less interesting, and you know, you pare down, let's say, 10,000 good projects, and eventually only 2 or 3 get to the very top and get funded. Okay, this world is not going to improve very rapidly with that kind of bottlenecks along the way. So a while ago, I started to look at the financial plumbing, as we called it, trying to move large amounts of capital into these projects, and I really laud James's idea to try and make some innovations. The global leasing idea is just fantastic. Okay, you want to get ideas like this to try and get more money that weren't accessible to projects in these poorer places that have less credit, that are less believable, that we have less information about. We try to do that, and I think actions like the one that GSI and James are working on, and the school here, those are fantastic. But I'm thinking, is there another way? So in some respects, using the conventional financial plumbing system is great, but I'm wondering if we can re-engineer the financing altogether. And recently, it hit upon me that something that I know conventional finance is not all that happy with, it could provide the answer. And what I'm alluding to here is blockchains. Okay, so suddenly we're in this discussion about finance, and talking about blockchains could be a form of heresy. I understand that, but I think there are ways to approach this problem in a different way. What blockchains will do, and I'm happy to discuss this with anyone who is interested, what blockchains will do is make things more personal. The blockchain is a peer-to-peer network. Okay, so it's not peer to big business and business to business. It's actually people like us. If you heard these stories, how would you have reacted tonight or immediately? Would you be able to invest in, for example, the recycling of plastics? Okay, perpetual is a great idea, but normally you would have to wait for a fund manager to organize a fund. You have to get people, and someone studies their project, does analysis, maybe visits India and so forth, and by that time you're not inspired. You know, the magic has worn off. But if Mark is able to talk to you over lunch, or maybe by email or by video conferencing, and really tell you his story, sometimes it doesn't need all these intermediaries to put your money to work here. Now, are we looking for $10 million checks from each one of you? No. If you work the blockchain technology properly, it is possible that we do a crowdfunding kind of idea so that each of us puts in $100, $10 even. Okay? Or if you have the money, like Mark does, maybe $1 million or $2 million. Okay? So these things are possible, and the amazing thing is that these are all contracted out. So some of the issues that James worried about, you know, who is going to give the guarantees, and so we can work out the guarantees as well. I have a lot of credit that I never use. I bet some of you have credit you never use. Why not get those credits together and guarantee it instead of waiting for Walmart or Danone to come and do that for us? I think that individually we have much more power to try and move the world, and that power is being wasted right now because no one is connecting us properly. So since the beginning of the year, I've been looking carefully at how we can re-engineer all these interactions, and I feel that blockchain is the answer, and or can provide some of the answer, and that's why we started this project called Simverse. If you are interested, please come to the website, take a look. There's a white paper that will explain some of our philosophy and our technology. But what I want to try and impress upon everyone is that these are wonderful projects. We can be inspired, and we can take up the arms and go to action. Thank you.
Thanks, Eugene, and I think that concludes our panel, and I don't know if we have time for a question or two, Bob? Yeah, time for a couple of questions.
Thank you, gentlemen. What's the difference, James, between microfinance and leasing? Why would one be beneficial over another? Because microfinance is up and running and functioning in some of these markets already.
Yeah, I think
And
there's
then how would blockchain, go after it?
I think there are a couple of differences. One, and I think what I really liked about the blockchain idea is that blockchain, in the way that it was described, has the ability to make microfinance scalable. And that has been a limitation of microfinance. I mean, one of the big problems that we face is that if you look at the percentage of philanthropic capital out of total capital that's available in the marketplace, maybe it's 5%, probably not. But if you look at taking that 5% and trying to solve problems with it, when 95% of the investment market is betting against you or betting in a competitive way, it's difficult to close the gap, right? So microfinance is very good at getting us to a sufficiency level in certain locations. The concept of a leasing model is one that shifts the risk away from the burden of someone taking a speculative investment on a technology or market that they may not well understand, and shifting it into the supply chain of a party who actually sees potential in that market because of its cost structure, because of the specific technology. In other words, they're dealing with a quality of information or set of knowledge that makes them willing to take more risk because they receive more benefit. The insertion of leasing into that provides a structure whereby that money can go to the benefit of the co-op or the community through a shared equity type ownership model. So I think those are a couple of differences, but I think that there is a real interesting idea here around utilizing blockchain to more broadly source small amounts of capital, make them active in the marketplace. And really, what I think needs to be added into that process is some type of informational or establishment filter around the quality and the integrity of the projects that are presented. How do we verify that? But I love the aggregation concept.
Because there was a question about blockchains being applied here, let me try and explain. Leasing is nearly perfect for blockchains. And one of the reasons being is that if we take an object and give it to someone to use, that's what the leasing is all about. When that payment doesn't come in, it's very hard to take possession of that back. Take, for example, a car that is leased or some equipment that is leased. First of all, that car moves around, so you have to go and find it and try to impound it, and there are all kinds of problems involved. Okay? If it's in Africa, it's going to be even harder. So some of the things that we tried to do in Korea was, I'm based in Korea, we tried to move some large equipment to Middle East and use it in the construction works there to lease it. But the Korean leasing company said, well, if it goes there and is used locally, if they don't pay back, what are we going to do? We can't bring it back. It's really hard. There are laws, blah, blah, blah. Okay? So the leasing companies have problems putting all this asset overseas and into unknown areas. What we can do with blockchains is we can make the contracts very watertight so that as soon as the payment doesn't come in, and the payment is, say, monthly, we can detect that right away. And if you fail once, we'll give you a warning, let's say. But if you fail twice or 3 times, we use IoT, Internet of Things. We just switch off your engine, and you're not able to use that at all. Okay? If there's a software in there, we will make it controllable from our end so that you're not able to operate the asset at all. So it's very rigorous, and once they have this big machine that is not doing any work, they're not making any money as well, they will renegotiate very quickly and be able to get onto the right track again. So there are these mechanisms in place that allows us to work very effectively, and you might think this is very mean and cold-hearted. Someone is leasing the car and you switch it off so that he can't go to work or can't do deliveries or things like that. But it's not really, because by doing something like this, you know that there is a very strong enforcement policy behind, and because of that, the people are making more money available for the leasing parts. So those who are not privy, who are not in the good enough credit zone to be able to lease, are now in a position to lease. So I think this is not only great for leasing to bring blockchains into it, but this will change, I think, the map of financing in poorer countries where there's much less trust. I think Madagascar will benefit from this. India certainly will benefit a lot. And I really do think that these tough enforcement ideas are not bad, but will help the people in need.
Okay, well, I think we had two questions in one. Thanks, Heather, that was great. I think we'll conclude, and I want to thank all of you for being here and thank the panelists. And again, all of you are welcome to go over to the Heifer International Pavilion to see the Technology Expo and mingle with some of the Heifer country managers if you'd like to do so. So thanks. We'll give the panel a hand.